Mesh selection. This is one of my favorite parts of the class. It's so important to know, what mesh are we starting with? What are you trying to reproduce? Are you trying to do a halftone, or do you just want to do a logo? That's two entirely different screens that you need for these two different films. We start with an 83 mesh. This is the sample I have up here. You want to do that for athletic prints, numbers, high density, clear gel. We're going to be getting into some of that later in the print room. 110 mesh. We probably sell more 110 mesh than any other screen mesh. It's the most common. Typical underbase, puff printing, or maximum coverage. Now we're going into the 156 mesh. Finer detail. Underbase, water-based prints, and discharge. Water-based and discharge, we're not going to get into that in this class right now. However, that's one of my favorite meshes. You can still get a good print with the 156, but you can pick up finer detail. We used it a lot for underbase for simulated process. Next, we move to 195 mesh. Again, fine detail, spot colors, water base. Now we're getting into something new, 45 line halftone. A lot of us are going to be getting into halftones at some point in time, and we found that certain meshes don't work well with certain halftones. You get down here into 305, well, we're into 65 mesh halftones. You don't want to put a 65 mesh halftone on a 195 mesh. It's not going to work. 230 mesh is our next one. Fine detail, spot color, simulated process. This is where we're getting into, I'm sure all of y'all are familiar with 4-color process. That works great for graphics, but in textile, we found that simulated process working with spot colors works phenomenal. That we recommend for about a 55 line halftone. The one that we'll be doing in class today, it's probably 50, 55 line. Finally, 305 mesh, 4-color process. Some people will still do 4-color process on garments. Maximum detail, 65 line halftone. I don't recommend anything higher than a 65 line halftone on a textile. I personally don't like 305 in a print shop. We've found over the years that flood bars and squeegee blades, they just destroy a 305. They're so fragile. So you want to stick, probably in this category there. I have a yellow mesh on this little screen here. I have one with white. You can't really see it that much. Why would you do one or the other? White mesh has more light refraction than dyed mesh. In other words, light will scatter when passing through white mesh. White mesh works well with lower mesh counts. If you're doing the numbers, athletic prints, whatnot. Spot color, larger text. Yellow mesh has less light refraction and gives a truer image. This results in a more defined edge and a crisp print on meshes counts above 156. I've always used 156 as my guide. Anything finer than that, I will go to a yellow mesh. Once you notice that a dyed mesh will require a longer exposure time, typically 10% longer. And that shouldn't be the deciding factor, that the yellow mesh is going to take longer to shoot simply because it takes longer. I've got a neat diagram here of how the light passes. If you'll think of it as a glass rod, the light literally passes through the yellow mesh and you get a truer reproduction. Whereas with white, it tends to bounce around a lot. So for most spot colors, you're not going to have any problem with that. Halftones, I do recommend the yellow mesh. And that's very important. Any questions on dyed mesh?
So Chuck, is it pretty much standard? I mean, if you're going to do a halftone yellow mesh, can you use white mesh for halftones, or is that?
Okay, the question was, can you use white mesh for halftones, or is yellow typically? what you would use? And that's a good question. And I don't think that this would even shoot on a white mesh. I wouldn't do it on a white mesh. And so my question would be probably no. I would go to a yellow mesh. You want to reproduce, because some of these dots, they can be 5%. You know, you can get some really fine dots on there. Well, with our illustration, when you start hitting your fine dots with this light scatter, you're not even going to pick them up. So with the yellow mesh, you're going to get a true reproduction of that. So I wouldn't use white mesh for halftones. I just wouldn't do it. Yes, sir.
Is there a longevity issue regarding mesh? Does one last longer than the other?
No, that's a good question. Does one mesh last longer? Not really. Basically, this is like an Easter egg. You know, they take it and dye it. That's how they get that color on it, you know. Years ago, we actually had many different colors. We actually had red. Red worked real well. The light passed really well through that. But somehow or another, the EPA decided that that dye was dangerous in some way, so they didn't allow it. Now we just have yellow and white. But they'll last the same. You know, it's not really, if you really think about it, the white is probably your coarser meshes, so they are going to last longer because of that reason. But it isn't inherent that a white would last longer than the yellow.
Chuck, we got another question in there.
Okay.
Can you get both colors in whatever mesh count you like?
Okay, good question. Can you get both colors in all the different meshes? Yes, you can. We do these pre-stretched screens here. Now, we don't get into yellow mesh until they start getting into the 230s, and I don't like that. I've been against that from the very beginning. You know, it's white mesh all the way up to that point. You can get 83 mesh, 110, 156, all these in a yellow mesh, and I recommend it if you can, you know, if you'll pay the little extra amount. I think you get just a much better screen. Obviously, with an 83, you know, that isn't going to really matter that much, but you'd be surprised. Just 156 mesh, if we shot that halftone on a yellow and then a white, exact same exposure, you're going to get a much better screen with the yellow. And there's no doubt about it.
Chuck, you got one more right there.
Okay?
Do you recommend only using yellow though? Or would you just use white?
Why would you use white over the yellow, or just recommend yellow all the time? Well, obviously, you're going to pay more for a yellow mesh, and it probably wouldn't make sense if you were just going to do numbers or athletic prints. Go with the white mesh. With Harley Davidson, I probably had 20 different meshes at any point in time, and most of them were dyed, but I had that choice of doing it. But again, if you use my formula here, anything finer than 156, I think that's the way to go. You know, that's what I recommend. You ask 4 people in this industry and they'll tell you 4 different answers, but I've shot 1 million screens, and I've found over the years that if you will stick to 156 and finer and do those in yellow, it'll work much better. It did for me, that's for sure.
Chuck, you got another one right here.
Okay? I'm sorry, one more time? For more detail? The question is, what mesh do we recommend for high detail? Again, we can go over this again. I don't know if you can see this. It's in your workbook, but 83 mesh, typically, you know, spot colors, 110. I really don't get into finer detail till I get into 156. Again, 156 threads per inch, you're going to pick up some pretty good detail. I don't recommend a 156 for a lot of halftones. It's going to have to be a 32 line probably in that respect. But it really depends. Is this for, definitely for a t-shirt? If you're doing a white t-shirt, you can get away with a 195 or a 230. But if you're doing a dark shirt with white ink, you're going to have to stay in this area, you know. And a lot of people too, they don't engineer their art correctly to go on a certain color t-shirt. You know, if you're going to put a halftone on a t-shirt and it's going to be white, you're going to have to go into these finer meshes simply because, and you'll see with our classroom today, you can get a nice white with a finer mesh and a halftone. So typically 195, 230, 156, those three are probably going to be your, you know, for fine detail. Again, I just really don't like 305 mesh. It's just so fragile. Okay? Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, lighter inks, whiter inks going on dark garments. We want to probably stay from 156, 110, 83. Dark inks going on light garments, the 156, 195, and 230. Yes, sir?
What are some of the signs that your screen is tension is there anything when you're printing that shows that the screen's not as tight as it used to be?
Well, now we have meters. We actually have tension meters that you know, that can measure that. All of them we stretch here. We use the CFAR technical guides to go by that. I mean, you can just by hand. I mean, you really can't tell. It's interesting. The meter that they use is similar to what they use for adjusting the tension on drum heads. So, you know, if it feels like it's that good, you know. But I've worked with a lot of screens that were way past, you know, they should have been thrown away, you know. Yes, sir.
Would you say it's better to go with a lower mesh count if you want to do a dark print on a darker shirt?
No, absolutely not. The question was a dark ink on a dark shirt. I've seen it happen many times. For example, if we wanted to reproduce this design on a dark shirt, I wouldn't do it with an 83 or a 110, and I probably wouldn't even do it with a 156, although 156 would probably be a good start. Probably a 195 possibly, because if you put this through a 110, it's just going to blur. It almost always will. Black ink, for some reason or another, tends to be a little bit thinner than our white inks. White ink is like oatmeal. There's a lot of ingredients in there. Black is a very simple ink, and it'll be difficult to get a real good sharp print if you did put it through one of those. Of course, if you're doing a number, you know, that's different. But black inks work much better through a finer mesh. You know, it'll stay a lot sharper. Yes, sir.
Question on that, you say you should go to like a 195 or a higher print count on the halftones?
Yes.
What if you have a design that has halftones like the design you showed us, but also has like areas of large deposit of white?
Well, again, that's kind of that catch-22 that we deal with, you know.
Do you have to use two separate white screens, one with a higher mesh count?
Sometimes that works out better. I mean, I've seen that. However, with inks now, and again, you'll see when we get down to the print room down there, you can still get a pretty good white with a 156. You know, you don't have to necessarily go to these higher meshes. White inks now are amazing. You know, they really have improved them over the years, and we've learned to work with them. And again, on 156, you'll be surprised what a good print you can do. But if it absolutely has to be a really bright white, you might want to go to two whites. You know, I've seen that done too. And that's that fine line we have to go between. You know, do we put it on a fine screen or a coarse screen, you know, to get maximum coverage? A lot of people now too, though, they don't like that bulletproof vest feel. You know, they like a softer feel. So the finer meshes have given us that capability to pick up detail and get a good white at the same time, you know. Any other questions? I feel like y'all are getting warmed up now. You're doing good. Yes, sir. One more time, I'm sorry. The 156, I'm sorry? Oh, without a doubt. Great question. What is the best common screen? I'm going to answer it with two answers. The 110 and 156, without a doubt. The 110, again, that's our most common screen is the 110. But if I had to pick two, it'd be the 110 and 156 because that's going to give you that ability to give a nice spot color, or you can approach halftones with 156. So if a lot of times when I start people up, of course we're going to have the 110s, but we're also going to have the 156s because sometimes you want to go to a softer print or possibly a halftone. You can adjust a white ink and still get a nice bright white and go through a 156, much like our classroom shirt that we're going to do, and get a really good coverage with that. You'll see. Okay, so this is a two color. We're going to start out with the white. We're just going to do a one hit white on this one because I really wanted this to be kind of subtle. Now I'm not going to flash this because we're going to put this next color down and it's not really touching. Now this is high density clear. Now on this we're going to pull. If you pull, you're going to lay down a lot more. We want to lay a lot of this on there. So two, now we want to flood it. Okay, now we're going to go to the flash unit for about 12 seconds. Okay, all we're doing is gelling this ink about 230 degrees. So now we've got a base on here. So now we're going to add just enough more here to give us a nice glue layer. Again, we're going to pull. You can see we've got a nice glossy. Now, if you wanted to, you could leave it like this to give it a tone on tone. That's kind of a neat look. So now you have to have your foil ready. You have to have a squeegee, and it's very important that you do it the way that I'm showing you. We want to work with good firm pressure from the center out. Your color goes up, and again, you want to be fast. Go all the way out. Don't miss any of this, okay? Now I've got it done, you want to rip it off. Now, this is real important. This is only gelled, so now we have to run it down the dryer and it'll be fully cured. And that's the process.